I don't know about you, but I love lists. I am a list kind of guy. I'm always making lists of things. Maybe it comes from all these years of being a pastor and making lists, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5, point 6, whatever it might be, and alliterating them a lot of times. And so I was thinking about lists, and I thought, I've got tons of lists, but I wanted to find something that was just very current. So last night, after everybody else went to bed, I took out my iPad and I said, all right, I'm going to find some current lists, because when I find a list, I just stop and read it. If it catches my attention. So, if back in the day when they actually had magazines that we looked at, you'd find lists, and now it's on the internet, and you find lists, all kinds of lists, and some of them are just junk lists, and some of them are important. And I thought, I want to find something that's kind of relevant to today and what we're doing. And one of the very first things that I saw was this. It was a list that was from it's actually from a website called grandparents.com. It was 10 sayings about life from around the world. And wow, 10, that's 10 points. I could use that. And I could probably preach that, 10 whole points. And there's ways we teach children about love and life and those kinds of things. And it was interesting because it just looked at different countries of the world and how they teach their kids. And one of them was the country of, we'll go down to start at the bottom, kind of start 10 and go upwards, was India. And they said their saying about life is the great minds discuss ideas, medium minds discuss events, and little minds discuss people. So after church, I want to talk to you. I've got a few people, so just hang around and we'll know what we're doing. Let's see, Finland. I like Finland. They got it pretty good. Finland says closeness without conflict only exists in cemeteries. Only in the cemetery. And so if you're wondering where you're going to be able to go without conflict, that's one of them. You'll be able to go there someday. China said to forget one's ancestors is to be a brook without a source, a tree without a root. And so they gave us ancestors.com and ancestry.com. And then you have Kenya. Kenya said, treat the world well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was willed to you by your children. And then I really got to Egypt, and I thought, wow, really? Egypt says this about life. If you marry a monkey for its wealth, the money will go and the monkey remains. Thinking, that's what you got about life as a monkey? And I thought about that, and then I realized what they're talking about, that money is fleeting, but personality's forever. So you better choose your mate wisely. And some of you are thinking, man, I wish I'd been to Egypt before I got married. Then I would have known that this character is going to stay a character his whole life. And that's what we get. And so, lists are important. I don't know how many of you remember, I know some of you are almost old enough to remember David Letterman, and he had every night a top 10 list, right? I loved that. I did. I wanted to stay awake long enough for that. I just, the rest of it I didn't really care all that much about, but I loved his top 10 list. It was a great way to go to bed at night, I thought, with a top 10 list. And I wish they would just bring those back, leave him in retirement. That's fine. Just take his top 10 list and show them to us every night. Like, here's your top 10 list for the night before you go to bed. And those are neat times, aren't they? I enjoyed those top 10 lists because they just, kind of just breathes into my psyche of how I operate, I guess, and what's important to me. And so I was looking at what we're talking about now. We're talking about covenants this month. We're talking about these promises from God who never gives up. And today we are in God's top 10 list covenant. Now we've already looked at 2 covenants before. You remember that we looked at God's never again covenant that he made with Noah. He said, never again, Noah, will I destroy the earth by a flood. And in fact, here is the responsibility for the earth. You are now to take care of it. I'm giving this into your hands. And so that was his never again covenant. And then he made not a never again covenant, but he made the always covenant, remember. And he made that covenant with Abraham. And we talked about that last week. With Abraham, he said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. I will make you a father of many nations. There will be kings among your descendants, and I will give you abundance and prosperity, and I will be with you always. And so it was an always covenant. Now, today we look at a different kind of covenant. We're looking at this top 10 list covenant of God, and it is somewhat different than the other two. The other two was all about God. It was what God was going to do. Remember, God just said, here's what I'm going to do for you. This is the God I'm going to be for you. And he made that covenant with Abraham and with Noah, but he didn't ask them really to do anything. He just said, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. Now today, when we come to Exodus chapter 20, God is saying a little bit different. He's saying, this is what I'm doing, but this is your part of the deal. He said, this is the part of the deal that I have for you. We're talking about the 10 Commandments, right? In case you weren't hadn't figured that out, I put it there in your sermon notes. The 10 Commandments in Hebrew, Tesseret, Havarim. It is the 10 terms in Hebrew. He's talking about these are the terms of the deal. We understand that, don't we? We have a hard time comprehending the first two covenants because God just says, this is what I'm doing. But when we enter into a contract with somebody, we have a give and take there, don't we? You're going to do something, I'm going to do something. I'll do something, you'll respond back in kind. And so we have it's a give and take relationship. And so there's this contract relationship. It's the conditions of the contract, if you will. And so in the first two, we didn't have that. Now God says, here are the conditions. And we think, oh, finally, now we get to where we understand it. This is something that we can somehow put our teeth into. But then we get into it and we realize that there is still a difference between how we understand a contract and how God is presenting it. Because when we have that contract, it's you do this and I'll do that. You don't do it, I won't do it. God never says that. He didn't make his love conditional upon our agreeing to or our ability to be able to complete these 10 Commandments. He said, I love you, and I'm always going to love you. And it's unconditional. He didn't say, keep this top 10 list, or I won't love you. He didn't say, keep this top 10 list, or you won't be my people. He didn't say that at all, did he? He simply said, here it is. He says, here are these 10 principles, here are these 10 commandments, here are these 10 rules to live by. When you live by them, he says, you make it possible then for me to bless you. If you choose not to live by them, then you invite all kinds of calamity into your life. But I still love you unconditionally. It doesn't affect my love for you, whatever your choice is. But he said, if you want to live with my blessing, here is your part in it. Then you want to follow these. Now, the Old Testament is just chock full of commandments to follow. Jewish scholars have set the number at 613. They cover the whole gamut of what we do as human beings. They go from dietary laws to rules of commerce and personal relationships and even personal hygiene. So God just covered the whole base with who we are as people in the Old Testament. So the 10 Commandments then become, if you will, the ideological basis that the others can rest on. It is that footing that those other 613 commandments are based upon. It gives us some place to kind of get it in context, if you will. And so the mere existence of the 10 Commandments is an interesting fact in our society today. You've seen that on the news. It's a constant thing. We put the 10 Commandments for decades in courthouses, in schools, in state houses, those kinds of places, putting replicas of them and all those kinds of things. And then they go to court and people try to get rid of them. They do. But you know what? I'm not going there at all today. That's another battle for other people to fight. That's not for this morning. I am not concerned about who is or isn't taking down the 10 Commandments from a courthouse or from a schoolhouse. What I am going to deal with is what we need to have written on our hearts today that nobody can take away. That's what God was concerned about. God was concerned about, as he gave this list, as he told these things to Moses and gave them on Mount Sinai, he said, this is what I want you to have on your heart. This is what I want my people to have on their heart. And so I'm going to ask you to do that. Now, I'm not asking you to name them. I'm not going to do that. I really thought about having you memorize them this week and ask you to do that, and I hope that you will anyway. But naming them in a group of people can be a little bit embarrassing because you might forget one. In honor of Veterans Day, I remembered an incident that happened when I was at Camp Pendleton, and we were waiting in a conference room for our daily meeting with the CO, and he was a little late getting in, and so we were there, and there was probably about 12, 15 of us around the table, the conference table, and we were just talking, and got all these Marines, men and women, and they were, some I knew were Christians, some I didn't know very well, and some I knew probably weren't Christians, and somebody made a comment about the Ten Commandments, and because I was there, and I said, hey chaps, what's the deal with the Ten Commandments, and tell us about them, and I said, okay, well tell me what you remember, what you know about them, see if you can come up with a list. And so they started giving me a list of the Ten Commandments. And they worked at this thing for over 5 minutes trying to figure out what they were, because they didn't have a Bible in front of them. They didn't have anything that they could look at, and some of them probably had never even heard them all at one time. And so they were working through it, and they got through 9 of them eventually. In about 5 minutes, they got through 9 of them, and they just could not get the last one. There was one more that they couldn't find, and finally they gave us, we're done. We can't figure out we got the 9 commandments. We don't have a 10th one. And so, you know which one you missed, don't you? And they said, well, no, we don't know. That's why we're asking you. And it was, thou shalt not commit adultery. And, then I didn't go into preaching too much right there. But that's not unusual. But, what the funny thing is, if you do that with a group of Christians, many times that's the one they forget too. They just because they think, well, I would never do that, so they just forget that one. So I'm not going to ask you to say them out loud, but got to remember that if you don't know them, it's hard to follow them. So it might be nice to kind of have a good idea of what they are, and we're going to help you do that here this morning, real quickly here. There's a sense in which these are so important, and we understand that, but keeping these 10 commandments is not all that there is to the Christian life. It is not all there is. There's a sense in which there's a whole lot more to the Christian life than just these 10 commandments. But there's also one sense in which there's a whole lot less to the Christian life than these 10 commandments. And we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. But before that, let's look at these 3 commitments that God has given us. Am I only on this microphone? All right. Try now. Am I still on? Okay. We're good? All right. I don't know why, but we're good now. It came back on. All right. So 3 areas of commitment the 10 Commandments call us to. And I'm not chained now to right here. 10 areas that God calls us to commitment. The first area God calls us to is He's calling us into a covenant with Himself. God wants to call us into a covenant with Himself. Now that's important. The first 4 commandments focus on our spiritual life. And our relationship with God. And before I get any further, I do want to point out that not all religious groups look at the 10 Commandments and number them the same way. There are differences in how they group them together, if you will, in these 17 verses. One group, the Jews, look at this, and in their tradition, they count the preface as the first commandment, and then they combine the first 2 commandments as one, and so they come up with 10 commandments. But the first one to them, the preface, is the first commandment. Now, if you come from a Roman or a Lutheran tradition, Roman Catholic or Lutheran tradition, you counted it a little bit differently when you were in that church. The Romans and the Lutherans look at it and they say, okay, this is what we have. They say that they divide they have the preface and the first 2 commandments they combine into one, and then they divide the last commandment into 2 commandments. And now we're very confused. But the good news is we're not Jewish, and we're not Roman Catholic, we're not Lutheran, we're Baptist, and we're kind of an offshoot of Protestantism, and we're right how we do it. So we're good to go. And so we have a preface and then 10 commandments, not combining and all those kinds of things. We just take it straightforward. Here's the preface and here's the 10 below it, and that's what we do. So, and that's probably pretty accurate. I don't think God said, okay, Moses, or Charles and Heston, whoever you are up here on Mount Sinai, here are the top 10 reasons, and I want you to be holy, starting with number 10 and counting down like David Letterman would have done. He didn't do it that way. He just said, these are my words to you, and I want you to follow them. And if you do, you open the door for my blessing you. And if you don't, then you open your door to calamity in your life. And the choice is going to be yours. But I'm going to love you with all my heart anyway. I am a good God. He says in the preface, I am the Lord your God, in chapter 20, verse 3. I am the Lord your God. That's where it all begins. God wants you to remember that first and foremost, before you did anything, before you had your first thought, before you breathed your first breath, God was already a good God to you. He was already great. How great is our God? How great is our God? You didn't do anything to deserve His goodness. He just is good. He is just good. And so He said, I am the Lord your God. I am a good God. I am a great God. And then He said what? And then He said, understand that I delivered you from slavery in Egypt. To the Jews He said, I am a great God. I am a good God. I delivered you because I am good. Not because of anything you did or didn't do. I already chose to love you. I am a good God. I am a great God. Now, that's what He said to the Jews in Exodus chapter 20. If God were sitting right next to you, having a personal conversation with you right this moment, what would His preface be to you? I am a good God. I have delivered you from poverty. Or would it be, I am a great God. I have blessed you with a wonderful family. I am a great God. I have put you here in this place and time of marvelous opportunity. What would He say to you? Because God would have a personal thing to say to you. Because that's who He is. He is a great God. He is a good God. And He says, I am great God. I have chosen to love you unconditionally, which means whether you do anything or not, I am still going to love you. But I'm calling you to have a personal relationship with me. I am a great God. That's the preface. That's what He has to say. So what would He declare to you? Now, the 10 Commandments are important because they remind us that before God asks anything of us, He's already poured out His blessings in our lives. So before He even gets to the 10 Commandments, He's already told us the end result. He said the end result is, I've already chosen to love you, and I've already blessed you. And I'm going to continue to bless you no matter what. He said, I'm going to love you. And that can be seen in Jesus Christ better than anything else. Jesus came while we were still sinners. In Romans 5:8 it says, again, that God demonstrates His own love for us in this, while we were what? While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He said, I am a great God. I died for you. I understood that you could not get to where I am. I understood that you were lost in your sin and you could not get to the Father in heaven. And so I came as the bridge between you and your sin and a holy God. And I didn't ask you to do anything. I just came because I love you. I am a great God. I am a good God. That's His promise to us. So you say, well, what commitment does He want from me? It's a commitment
a priority. It's a commitment that says, I want you to put me first in your life. That's what he's asking. That's what he asked the Jews. That's what he asks you today. He said, would you put me first in your life? Would you make me first and foremost the most important person in your life? Would you do that? Will you come to that point in your life where you say, God, you're number one in my life? That's what he's asking for us, or from us today. And so he begins to give this list. The first one is found in verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. You have no other gods before me. In our culture today, people aren't real likely to worship gods like Zeus and Baal and Athena. You know, you probably don't have a lot of friends that do that. If you're going to go out today after lunch, go to Cracker Barrel, you're probably not going to stand in line waiting, you know, you'll have Methodists because they get out before us, and Episcopalians because they're already standing in line by now. But you're not going to have, you know, too many people who said, man, it was a great day. We worship Baal today. You know, I don't know anybody that worships Baal, do you? I suppose somewhere there's some, you know, possibility of that, but it's not real typical. We don't do that in America really very much, do we? But we do worship other gods. You know one of the main gods that we worship? It may not be Zeus, may not be Baal, may not be Athena, but we worship wealth, we worship fame, we worship success. You ever heard anybody say, man, that person sure is lucky, look how successful they are. It's like that's the end all of everything. That if I'm successful, no matter how I got there, by worshiping wealth, by worshiping the end result of it, then I'm successful. And that's our God. That's the God of our culture. We worship success. Like as long as I can put, I'm a successful, write that on my tombstone, successful, then that's what it was all about. And God said, no, no, no. Worship me. Don't worship whatever culture tells you is important. That won't do. He says, put me first, no other gods before me. Secondly, he says, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Verse 4. Again, it's not likely that we give undue reverence to little statues, in, you know, a statue of a bird or a horse or a flower or whatever it might be. There are, in our culture today, there are some that do, however, have those little things, and they worship them. Mostly they came from other countries, and now they brought those forms of worship with them. But primarily, in most of our experience today, for those of us who grew up here and maybe in the Bible Belt or wherever, that's not who we are. But we do have a tendency to worship other things that we build. We can fawn over vehicles or a house or even a building, can't we? I shared in the early service that I had read a blog about a pastor that I know that was talking about when he and his family a few years ago went on vacation. And there were 5 of them in his family, and they showed up at a church on a Sunday morning they'd never been to. They're in a different city, and then here's this beautiful building, and it said obviously it was brand new. They just built it. And they got there about an hour early because they didn't know what time the service started, so they got there about an hour early, and they found their way into the auditorium, the worship center, and they were sitting kind of right in the middle of it. Nobody else around except the worship team, the praise band. They were up getting ready, and they were practicing, and they were sitting there listening to it, and the pastor said he noticed that over in the aisle, on the carpet, this brand new plush carpet, there was a really strange looking stain that was there. And he said that as he was watching it, some guy from the church, a man from the church, came walking by, and he happened to notice the same stain. And he stopped and he looked at it. He started looking at the stain on the ground, on the carpet, their new carpet. Said he even got down on one knee and was looking at it really close. Got up, walked away, came back just a moment later, pulling another guy there. And they both got down on a knee, and they were looking at it. And they just didn't know what to do. And they said, we got to get the pastor. So they got up, and they went, and they found the pastor, and they brought him back. So now it's 3 men, 2 men, and the pastor standing there. Then I'll get down on their knee, and they start looking at it, wondering how it got there. And they started making a list. They started making a list of all the potential culprits who did this. And one of the guys said out loud, very loudly, "Who in the H did this?" And it wasn't Heck. He said, "Here I am with my family. We've never been here before. They don't know us. We're the only other people in the auditorium except the worship team up on the stage. And they never even gave us their attention because they were focused on a spot on the carpet." If we're not careful, we can worship those things that we build. It's just carpeting. It's just a building. And we ignore the people. We ignore God. Don't have any other gods before me. Don't make an idol. Don't make an idol for yourself, he says. Thirdly, he says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. In verse 7, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Now, we grew up, if you grew up in church, you grew up learning that a different way. And most people, these Marines around the table had no trouble coming up with number 3. And we learned it in King James English, didn't we? And you could probably say it with me, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain," right? Yeah, we know that in vain. Growing up, I knew what that meant. Vain meant, there may be 2 or 3 words I couldn't use, ever. Nada. You're not using those 3 words. Because that would be taking God's name in vain. Now that's probably not a bad thing to learn, because you probably shouldn't use those names and those words. However, in Hebrew, that's not exactly what was being said. The word there for vain means a vain oath, or another way of saying that is a false oath. Something that is untrue and claiming that it is true, perhaps, or something that is untrue, or get around something that's true, but saying that's not true. I heard a preacher say one time years ago that what it means to take God's name in vain is that when we hear His word and ignore it, when we know His word and refuse to speak it, we're taking His name in vain. So if God is telling you today to do something, and you know that's true because God's telling you, and you say, "God, I'm not doing that anyway," you're saying, "God, your word's not true, and I'm not doing it." And that's taking His name in vain. If He tells you not to do something, and you say, "I know I'm not supposed to do it, God, but I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to ignore what you told me," you're taking His name in vain. And so this particular commandment, is about hypocrisy. It is about making sure that our religious talk matches our religious walk. We are guilty many times of hypocrisy in the body of Christ, but we should not be. And so one of the things we have to do is make sure that what we say we believe, we actually do. And what we say we believe we shouldn't do, we don't do. So that we match what we say with how we act, and we act with how we say. And so that's what he's saying. Make sure that you're not living as a hypocrite here when it comes to my word. And then fourthly, as we learn how to have this covenant with God Himself, is to remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy in verse 8. Today is not the Sabbath day, not by the Jewish calendar. Today is the first day of the week, not the last day of the week. And we don't keep the Sabbath like they did in the Old Testament. That's true. But this is not about just a particular day. You say, why do we worship on Sundays? It's because the early church immediately began to meet together on the day of the resurrection. And so every Sunday is a resurrection Sunday. Every Sunday is a celebration of Easter, by the way. So if you got Easter eggs, you want to give them to me, that's fine. Because this is every Sunday we celebrate the resurrection. And we meet because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the early church did that, and so we do that. But it is about saying, God, here is still a day that I'm going to dedicate to you. It's a day that I'm going to give you my full attention. And I know that's very hard in today's schedules. It's very hard with the NFL going on. I understand that. But God says, I want you to give that day of attention to me. But it's more than just one particular day. It may be, He's saying, I need you and I want you to have that time with me every day of the week. Maybe it's 15 minutes a day to a half an hour a day. Maybe you have that quiet time with me. Maybe it's a time, it's a sabbatical once a year maybe, where you say, I'm not going to Disneyland, I'm not going wherever it might be and just doing all the things that the world has to offer, but now, God, this is just a time for you and me for a week, where we can just get really intimate together, where we say, all right, God, I want to have that Sabbath rest with you. We all need that in our lives. And so the first 4 are about our relationship with God. And I've spent almost all my time right here on these first 4, because if we don't get the first 4 right, then the others don't work. The other 6 just don't come together. And so they're the basis. These first 4 are the basis that the other 6 are really on. So he says, I'm calling you into covenant with myself. And then he is calling us into covenant with others. And the next 4 commandments deal with that others, how we relate to others, and talking about people around us in our lives. He starts out with the 5th commandment, honor your father and your mother, Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. And this is the only, by the way, commandment that comes with a promise, so that you may live long in the land your God is giving to you. And it's as simple as this. You cannot prosper if you don't give others the honor and respect that they deserve. And you cannot prosper and do that and give honor and respect to people that they deserve if you can't do that in your own family. And so we need to make sure that we are giving that proper respect. And I would like to just camp here for a long time, but we don't have time to do that today. That'll be for another Sunday. But I do want to say this, that whether you're a teenager, or whether you're a young adult, or whether you are a card-carrying member of the AARP, God cares about how you treat your family. He's concerned about that, because He knows what will happen if you don't to your life. And so He says you need to treat your parents with respect. Treat your family then with respect. Number 6, in verse 13, you shall not murder. This commandment tells us that human life, all human life is sacred, and we need to respect the lives of other people. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. See, we did remember it here in verse 14. This commandment reminds us that we're to honor those vows with human beings and with one another, especially in that area of our covenant of love and fidelity with our spouse. And so He expects us to do that. He wants us to take that very seriously. He says you should not steal in verse 15. That tells us that we're to respect the possessions of others, and we shouldn't accept for ourselves, or we should accept for ourselves rather only what we've earned. I don't think that I'm in danger of preaching today to very many of you who are going to leave here and go over to Walmart, put on a big jacket, and throw a bunch of stuff under your jacket and then walk out the door without paying for it. If you are, stop and talk to me before you leave. All right? But I don't think that's going to happen. Not likely. But there are a lot of ways we don't respect the property of other people. We just don't call it stealing. Guys, you ever borrowed a tool? We'll just go with a leaf blower around here. You ever borrow your neighbor's leaf blower? Man, I need a leaf blower right now. I'll go borrow my buddy's across the street. You borrow it, and then 2 years later, it's still in your garage or your shed. I didn't steal it. It's his. Yeah, but you kept it all this time. Not yours. You're not respecting his property. You've taken it. We need to be careful that we respect those property rights of other people and we don't steal. And so he said, I'm calling you into this relationship not only with me, but with the people around you. So honor your parents. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. And then he says, I'm calling you into commitment with yourself. So he calls us into commitment with ourselves. These last two commitments and commandments are less about how we relate to others and more about how we choose to define ourselves. They have to do with who we are internally, who we see ourselves to be, and how we choose to live in our world. No matter what's going on, this is how we're going to live, no matter what's happening. Number 9 is this: you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. That's Exodus chapter 20, verse 16. That commandment deals with integrity. It's about personal integrity, who you are as a human being, who you've already decided that you're going to be. And so it's about integrity. We find ourselves occasionally the opportunity to say something about somebody else in such a way that that person doesn't look good. Could you imagine that anybody in this last political campaign would have done that? Who would have fudged on the truth just a little bit so that somebody else looked bad? Yeah, it happens all the time, doesn't it? And when we watch it on TV, when we watch it on CNN or somewhere else, we look at it, we say, well, they're lying. I'm not going to believe that. I'm not going to believe it. Or sometimes we watch it and we say, man, that sounds true to me, and we can't tell the truth because we don't know all the situations, do we? So I'm not sure if they're lying or not. Maybe that's true. But you know where I know you're always going to know it's true? Is when you're doing it. When you're fudging on the truth, when you're telling a lie, even a little white lie, you know it. You're doing it so that somebody else will look bad and maybe you'll look better. And you know what you're doing. Doesn't matter whether everybody else knows it or not, you know it. That's integrity when you say, I'm not doing that then. Those words are not coming across my lip because I've got too much integrity to do that. I've already decided beforehand I'm never going to do that. So when Satan tempts me to say something about Mike Shaughnessy that I know is not true so that Mike will look bad and I'll look good, I'm not going to do it, Mike. Usually. And I'm not going to do it because that's personal integrity. He calls us to personal integrity. So he said, just don't do that. Don't lie. Don't lie about your neighbor. And then, number 10, he says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor, in verse 17. And this commandment really gets to the very heart and soul of who we are and who we're to be. And you know what? This commandment is also about integrity. When he calls us into covenant with ourselves, he says, I am calling you to personal accountability, to personal integrity. And this commandment reminds us to say, I will be satisfied. I won't covet. I will be satisfied. I will be satisfied with who I am. I will be satisfied with what I have. I will be grateful for my blessings, and I will accept responsibility for all of my choices. I will not be driven by what isn't mine. I won't spend my life wanting things that I cannot have or expecting to have things I haven't worked for. Doesn't sound like our culture today, but it's the integrity God calls us to. This do not covet commandment reminds us of something that we would like to forget many times. It reminds us that God blesses other people too. Sometimes he says, I'm going to bless the person sitting next to you or in the other pew over there. I'm going to bless them in an abundant way. And you're sitting there thinking, what about me? But I wanted to be blessed. I wanted that. I want it. And God says, it's not for you. It's for them. I'm going to bless them. And then this whole body thing comes into work, doesn't it? We're the body of Christ. We mourn with those who mourn, but we are to rejoice with those who rejoice. I like mourning with people who mourn, but I like to be the one they're rejoicing with. I want to be the one being blessed, and they rejoice with me, and God says, not your turn right now. And personal integrity, this do not covet thing, says, okay, I will rejoice even though I'm not the one being outrageously blessed right now. It's not my turn. I'll wait for my turn, however God chooses, when He chooses. But right now it's somebody else's turn, and I'm going to be just as deliriously happy with them and for them as I would be if it was me that was getting blessed. So I'm not going to try and steal your blessing. I'm going to be content with what God has given to me. You know what? A person with personal integrity can handle somebody else being blessed by God. You want to know if you got integrity? Think back then. Am I able to handle that with grace and dignity and with joy? Or do I throw a temper tantrum with God? That'll tell you where your integrity level's at. And you're going to have to decide what you need to do. You know, we could spend the next 10 weeks going through this. I've done that before, and I've preached through the 10 Commandments in 10 weeks and still not had a chance to scratch the surface hardly. We could spend the next 10 months covering this 10 Commandments. And today we did it in just a few minutes. But they represent the kind of covenant that God wants to make in response to the covenant He's made with us. He said, this is who I am. I am a great God. I'm a good God. I'm the Lord your God. And I have, and you filled in the blank, in your life. Now, to make it possible for me to be able to just outrageously bless you, then put me first in everything. Have this relationship with me. It's a covenant with Him. It's a covenant of priority. It's a covenant with others. It's a covenant of respect for who they are. And it's a covenant with ourselves. It's a covenant of integrity. He said, this is what I call you to. And I don't know if you can remember all of them, but I want you to give it a shot anyway this week. But what you're probably asking right now is, okay, Pastor, I got it, checked it off, 10 of them. If I do them, am I in? Right? Am I in? Am I like this with God now? Am I going to be in heaven because I did all 10 of them? Well, number one, you probably never will do all 10 of them. None of us do. But number two, the Christian life is not about doing all 10 of them. I said it's more, but it's also less. It's less. We can't keep all of them, but we're not called to keep all of them to be in with Jesus Christ. He said, I know you can't do it. And so He invites you to come into a faith relationship with Him on a personal basis. And He said, when you do that, then we have that relationship. Then you're in. It's based on faith. Faith in a God who is good, a God who loves us, and a God who calls us in to that relationship.